Nearly 3,000 years ago, a blind poet named Homer codified a story of gods, monsters, and a legendary, indestructible city called Troy. At the height of its power, Troy was ruled by King Priam. His eldest son, Hector, was the city's greatest and most honorable warrior. But the royal family was plagued by internal rot and dark omens. Priam's daughter Cassandra was cursed by the god Apollo to see the future but never be believed. And his youngest son Paris was prophesied before birth to bring about the absolute destruction of the city, leading his parents to exile him as a helpless infant. Across the Aegean Sea in Sparta, a very different kind of royal child was born. After Zeus, king of the gods, visited Queen Leda in the form of a swan, she produced 2 eggs. From one of these eggs hatched Helen, a girl who would grow up to become the most beautiful woman in the world. When Helen came of age, every warlord and prince in Greece wanted her hand in marriage. Fearing massive bloodshed over whoever was chosen, the cunning king of Ithaca, Odysseus, brokered a deal. He forced every suitor to swear a blood oath to violently defend the man Helen ultimately married. With the threat neutralized, she chose Prince Menelaus of Mycenae. The board was set. An exiled prince was fated to destroy his home. A prophet was systematically ignored. And a continent of heavily armed warlords was bound by a permanent military defense pact. All they needed was a spark. High above the mortal world, a divine wedding was taking place on Mount Olympus. Eris, the goddess of discord, was purposely left off the guest list. In retaliation, she crashed the party and tossed a golden apple into the crowd, inscribed with 3 words, "To the most beautiful." Instantly, 3 goddesses, Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, began fighting over the prize. Not wanting to anger any of them, Zeus passed the responsibility to a mortal. He forced a humble shepherd to judge the beauty contest. That shepherd was the exiled prince of Troy, Paris. Each goddess offered a massive bribe, but Paris took Aphrodite's deal, the love of the most beautiful woman on earth. Following Aphrodite's instructions, Paris traveled to Sparta and abducted Queen Helen. When he brought her back to Troy, his brother Hector was furious. His sister Cassandra shrieked in despair, accurately predicting that this would bring the fall of Troy. The royal guards dismissed her as a madwoman and locked her away deep within the palace. Back in Sparta, an enraged Menelaus cashed in his insurance policy. He called upon every Greek warlord to honor their blood oath. Bound by their previous promise to prevent violence, the greatest fighters in Greece had no choice but to abandon their homes and march on Troy. This petty beauty contest successfully weaponized a peace treaty. Because a few goddesses could not share an apple, a localized marital dispute transformed into a devastating continental war. The first to answer the call was Menelaus's brother, Agamemnon. As the ruler of Mycenae, he possessed immense wealth and commanded Greece's mighty fleet. Joining him were the ancient, wise king Nestor and Diomedes, a skilled politician and ferocious fighter. But not everyone was eager to fight. Odysseus, the very man who invented the blood oath, tried to dodge the draft by pretending to be insane. When recruiters arrived, he mumbled incoherently while plowing dirt with a horse and an ox. To test him, a soldier placed Odysseus's infant son directly in front of the plow. Odysseus instantly stopped, breaking character to save his child and sealing his fate. The Greeks also needed Achilles, the greatest mortal fighter to ever live. Invulnerable to physical harm everywhere except his heel, his mother knew a prophecy that he would die young if he went to Troy. To protect him, she dressed Achilles in women's clothing and hid him among the women of a distant island. Odysseus realized where Achilles was hiding and set a trap. He brought gifts for the women of the island, including a magnificent set of weapons and armor. Suddenly, Odysseus blew a war horn. While the women fled, Achilles instinctively stripped off his disguise and grabbed the sword, exposing his true identity. Despite their immense intellect, wealth, and physical strength, the most powerful mortals in the world were entirely powerless to escape the gravitational pull of this war. Before the fleet could even leave Greece, the winds entirely died out. Agamemnon had offended the goddess Artemis, and a prophet told him the only way to restore the winds was to sacrifice his eldest daughter, Iphigenia. Luring his daughter to a sacrificial shrine under the false promise of marriage, Agamemnon plunged his dagger into her chest. The winds finally returned. The siege became a collision of nations. The Greeks faced an alliance of Trojans, Lycians, and Amazonian warriors, while the meddling gods descended to the battlefield to pick their sides and ensure the bloodiest possible outcome. For 9 years, the siege resulted in a brutal stalemate. Starving and desperate, the Greeks raided neighboring towns for resources and enslaved women. Agamemnon claimed a woman named Chryseis, daughter of a priest of Apollo. When he refused to ransom her back, a disgusted Apollo rained a devastating plague of arrows down upon the Greek camp. Forced to return Chryseis to stop the plague, a petty and humiliated Agamemnon retaliated by stealing Achilles' own captive slave, Briseis. Deeply insulted by the king's disrespect, Achilles drew his sword, but the goddess Athena held his arm back. Instead of fighting Agamemnon, Achilles packed up his tents and completely withdrew his men from the war. The internal pride and competing egos of the Greek commanders crippled the army more effectively than any Trojan defense. Hoping to end the bloodshed, Paris and Menelaus agreed to a one-on-one duel for Helen. Menelaus brutally beat Paris down to the dirt. But right before the lethal blow landed, Aphrodite intervened, literally teleporting a bruised and feeble Paris directly back to his bedchamber. With the truce broken and Achilles still refusing to fight, Hector pushed the Greek forces all the way back to their ships. Desperate to save his allies, Achilles' best friend Patroclus secretly put on the hero's iconic armor and charged into battle. Believing he was fighting Achilles, Hector struck Patroclus dead, only realizing the mistake when he removed the helmet. When Achilles learned of Patroclus' death, his grief turned into a berserker rage. Wearing new armor forged by the gods, he chased Hector around the walls of Troy, slaughtered him, and then tied his corpse to a chariot, cruelly dragging it through the dirt for his family to see. That night, King Priam snuck through the enemy lines into the Greek camp. The old king dropped to his knees and begged a weeping Achilles for his son's mutilated body. Recognizing their shared grief, Achilles finally relented. But Achilles would not survive much longer. As he made his final push on the gates of Troy, Paris, guided by the god Apollo, fired a poisoned arrow. It struck Achilles squarely in the heel, the single vulnerable spot on his entire body, killing the invincible hero instantly. The pursuit of total vengeance ultimately stripped both armies of their greatest protectors, leaving nothing but absolute desperation on both sides of the wall. Facing a stalemate without their star warrior, Odysseus devised a final desperate gamble. The Greeks built a massive, hollow wooden horse, hid their most elite fighters inside its belly, and then dismantled their camp, sailing their ships just over the horizon to fake a retreat. The Trojans woke up to find the enemy gone and a giant peace offering sitting in the sand. Cassandra shrieked that it was a trap, urging them to burn it, but she was ignored for the final time. Mesmerized by the beauty of the gift, the Trojans dragged the massive horse through their impenetrable gates and began to celebrate. That night, while the city slept off its celebration, Odysseus and his men poured out of the horse. They silently slaughtered the guards, opened the gates from the inside, signaled the waiting fleet with fire, and burned Troy to the ground. 10 years of brute force and siege warfare had failed. In the end, the greatest city in the world fell to a simple deception and the arrogant assumption of victory. The sack of Troy was merciless. Achilles' son murdered King Priam right at the altar. Hector's infant son was thrown to his death from the city walls. And in the temple of Athena, the Greek warrior Ajax violated Cassandra as she hid beneath the goddess's statue. Disgusted by these war crimes, the gods cursed the victorious Greeks. Poseidon drowned Ajax in the sea. Agamemnon finally made it home to Mycenae, only to be butchered in his bath by his wife, who had spent the last 10 years plotting revenge for the sacrifice of their daughter. Very few made it out unscathed. Helen and Menelaus returned to rule Sparta. Meanwhile, a Trojan named Aeneas escaped the ashes of the city, crossing the Mediterranean to forge a new destiny, eventually laying the foundation for the lineage of Rome. As for the man whose trick won the war, Odysseus was cursed by the gods for his hubris. Before he could see his home or his family again, he would have to endure a terrifying, monster-filled nightmare of a journey that would last another 10 long years. The decade of violence leaves behind a world of ruined kingdoms and broken heroes. It stands as a reminder that when pride dictates the terms of engagement, the result is never victory, only a devastating chain reaction of survivors.